You've got the entire committee on virtual except for Ms.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Monday, June 6th special meeting of the City of Charlotte Economic Development Committee meeting. My name is Malcolm Graham, and I serve as chairman of the committee, and want to welcome each and every one of you here that's here in the building, as well as those who are working with us virtually. And so we have a tight agenda that's going to be very comprehensive, and so we want to take this opportunity to kind of get started and get started on time. I want to welcome all the committee members who are here with us today, and I'll give them an opportunity to introduce themselves, as well as to welcome our council colleagues who are joining us here today as well. We welcome them, as well as our mayor. So we have a pretty packed meeting. So let's start by introducing those who are in the room, and then we'll pivot to those. Let's introduce the committee first. And then we'll introduce those who are here virtually as well as in the room. Again, my name is Malcolm Graham, and I serve as Vice Chairman of the City's Economic Development Committee.
Good afternoon. I'm Victoria Watlington, Charlotte City Council Member representing District 3 and committee member.
All committee members? Mr. Vice Chairman?
Yes, sir. Ed Driggs, District 7 committee member.
Good afternoon. Dimple Ashmera, committee member and at-large council member.
I want to thank all the committee members for being here today. Now let's introduce those council colleagues who are joining us with us today.
Mr. Graham, Mr. Phipps is online as well. He's just not on camera.
Yeah, Greg Phipps, at-large committee member.
Thank you, Greg.
Larkin Eggleston, council member.
Braxton Winston, council member.
Tarek Bakari, former chair.
Julie Iselt, council member and mayor pro tem.
Vi Lyles, mayor.
And now we can introduce our staff, starting with our chairman. I'm the director of economic development.
Tracy Dodson, assistant city manager, director of economic development.
Tom Murray with the Charlotte Regional Visitors Authority.
David Abrams with Inner Circle Sports. We're a consultant to the City of Charlotte.
Dan Barrett with CAA Icon, consultant to the Hornets and HSE.
I think we have one online. Jeff, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Jeff Marks, founder, CEO of Innovative Partnerships Group.
And Steve will join us shortly, within the next 10 minutes.
Steve Patterson is one of our consultants as well with Pro Sports Consulting. He will be in momentarily.
So as you can see, we have a full house of council members, committee members, the mayor, as well as our consultants. And the goal and objective of this meeting is to really do a deep dive into examining the Spectrum Center project. Council members posed a number of questions at our last meeting, and the goal is to answer those questions as we go along the way. If there's follow-up questions, we will entertain them as well. I will defer to committee members first, and then we will invite other members who have questions to chime in at the appropriate time. My goal and objective is to run a tight ship today so that we can make sure that we get all the information necessary to everyone's satisfaction, and that we don't have to have another committee meeting at 5 o'clock to discuss the same items that we're discussing right now. So we're going to be very, very liberal in terms of making sure that all questions that have been asked on last week as well as today gets answered, while we have the subject matter experts around the table to help us get through this, so that this afternoon meeting basically is just dotting I's and crossing T's based on what we have discussed today, and bringing those council members who are not here with us up to date later this evening. So with that being said, I'll turn it over to Ms. Dodson to provide a Spectrum Center overview.
Right. Thank you, Councilmember Graham. As Councilmember Graham said, we have a lot of presentation to get through. We'll try to go section by section and allow you to ask questions at the end of each section. First, I wanted to start, if we could go to the next slide, please. Just start with reminding you the deal overview. As we said last week, we've been at this for over 3 years. We've talked about it a little bit along the way, but it really started with an intensive study and to get us to the point that we were last week, to have an agreed upon deal to bring to you for consideration. So I want to remind you what that is first, and then we'll talk about sponsorship. CTC, the community use of the building, was a couple questions that came up last week. The affordability as it relates to the hospitality and tourism funds, our MWSBE goals, as well as some of the community feedback. You remember we said last week that we were going to launch a website, and we have done that and want you to hear all of the comments or a lot of what we've gotten back. Next slide, please. So to go through the deal, next slide, I want to remind you what our current operating agreement entails. And the city's obligation for that are to pay for capital repairs. This can include things that are requirements by the MBA, replacement of the scoreboard or equipment, repairs to unsatisfactory work that was done during construction, or other things like carpet replacement. And so these are things that we are obligated to do. Capital improvements is another bucket which says that we have additions that have happened to 50% of other arenas can be requested, and that's part of what we negotiate. In 2013, we did a similar exercise to this, and the agreement was that the city contributed $27 million in capital improvements. That agreement also called out that we could start another assessment in 2019. I think we started the assessment in 2018, roughly, right there before, right around there, and then have worked since then through the assessment that was done to come up with what we are presenting here again today. Next slide. So what we're proposing is through the negotiations and through the analysis of the arena, we determined that we thought we were contractually obligated, based on what I just mentioned, to about $173 million. Because the current lease agreement expires in 2030, we wanted to consider a lease extension. That brought us to an additional arena renovations of $42 million. Those funds, the $215 million, would come from the city's tourism and hospitality funds, and this project would be executed over 4 years. Then we also discussed the Performance Enhancement Center or practice facility. We looked at this was an important piece of getting the 15-year extension. We capped the city investment at $60 million. And we also looked for new revenues so that it did not come from the hospitality funds. And we wanted to generate those revenues from naming rights and sponsorship opportunities of a larger district. So the city's costs are capped at $215 for Spectrum Center and $60 million for the Performance Enhancement Center. In total, our investment would be $275 million. Next slide. The Hornets commitment was to extend the operating agreement 15 years, keeping them and securing the Hornets here through 2045. They have also agreed to pay rent that totals $32 million through 2045. It would be a small amount up to 2031, and then $2 million a year after 2031. They would also contribute to an additional $1.1 million through 2045 for the capital funding. This is a current agreement that they have, but it was set to expire in 2024. They would also pay the operating expenses at Spectrum Center and commit to pay any cost overruns for the 215 at the arena and the 60 at the Performance Center. And this relieves the city obligation to contribute to the capital fund account for the $3 million, which would save us about $3.3 million. That's during construction. Next slide. So we have two options in front of you. We can stay the course, just do the contractually obligated at the $173 million, have no lease extension. This allows the Hornets to be able to come back every year and make capital improvement requests, just so everybody knows. And it most likely puts the opportunity to talk about a new arena in order to extend that lease in 2030. Again, not putting words in their mouth, but if you look at the age of the arena and the end of that lease, we believe that that would be something that would happen. Or we can look at the other alternative, which was to perform the obligated work plus additional improvements to the arena, plus the practice facility, and that would give us the 15-year extension. Take the lease extension, better align with the age of the building, and also identify the new revenue sources for the practice facility so all the funds do not come out of the tourism funds. So those are the two options that are in front of you today, and as we move forward through this discussion. Next slide. So the sponsorship opportunities and revenue source, there was a lot of questions last week around this, and we thought that the best thing to do was bring in Jeff Marks with IPG 360. We've worked with Jeff, and we did a study with Jeff several months back to talk about looking at naming rights beyond just the arena, looking and thinking about the creation of a district. Jeff's been great in educating us on how it's done in other places. And so we wanted Jeff to walk you through today the work that they do and a little bit of a couple of examples from other places in the country. So Jeff, I will turn it over to you.
Thanks, Tracy. So let me do a quick introduction. First of all, thank the committee and council for having me speak. And my team's had a pleasure of working with Tracy and Steve and others over the course of the last several months as we had conducted a competitive analysis of the commercial revenue opportunities, sponsorship and naming rights, and other partnerships. Tracy, I'm not sure, will someone hit the slide down as we go? Perfect. Why don't we go to the next page, please? So just quickly, I don't want to spend a lot of time, but a little bit about Innovative Partnerships Group. We are a firm that works with prestige properties in sports, entertainment, municipalities, universities, healthcare, and prestige real estate. And we work on one thing only, and that's maximizing long-term sponsorship and naming rights revenue. We do it in a way that's a little bit different than others in the industry. We have our own proprietary software that we go in, and the end goal is to look at a property who's might have asset value that others might not perceive, and it's our job is to turn that into something that brands will want to buy. Next slide, and feel free any chance of the way, ask me any questions as I go through this. We can go to the next page. This is just a few of our properties. We were just nominated for Agency of the Year. We've done that now the last 2 years, not including COVID. And we're headquartered in Los Angeles, but have representation in different parts of the United States and other parts of the world. We can move to the next one. Okay. So what we thought that we would do, and Tracy thought it would be really good for council to just take a step back and talk a little about what is sponsorships. So if we go to the next page, sponsorship is a loose term that's used quite often. And what we wanted to do is bring it to life on one summary slide here. So sponsorship is when a property can be an arena, a stadium, a team, a university, a municipality who has assets, and those assets are then converted into what a brand might want to be part of in the form of sponsorship. A lot of times, and traditionally, people think of sponsorship as a sign or their name or their logo. And what I really want the council to know today is that that's a little bit about backwards thinking. And what brands are looking for today is something different and unique and special, and something that is engagement, something that kind of breaks out of the clutter. And what we've seen lately is a transformation of brands not really looking to just spend their money with sports owners or sports properties, but doing much more impact or cause marketing. So the way we think about sponsorable assets are both media assets. So in the diagram below, that would be TV, radio, digital, social, out-of-home print, out-of-home billboard signage. But really what we're seeing today is something much more meaningful. and that's platforms and programs. So that might be DEI, sustainability, and other causes. And what's really interesting is a lot of cities and municipalities have these incredible programs, but they actually don't really have a way to optimize and how to monetize. So that's sort of what our group does, is we will work with what we call non-traditional properties as well as traditional properties. I mean, we work with, we're building a €2 billion project in Barcelona right now with the most valuable sports property in the world. And we're doing their district stuff as well. So we do a lot of sports, but we also work with a lot of non-traditionals. I'll pause there for any questions. All right, next slide. And Tracy, I'll move a little bit faster. So this is just a diagram to show you on the left, the traditional sports arena. But really what we're starting to see now on the right are more sports entertainment districts. And this is an opportunity for industry categories and brands to really come in and showcase their products, their services, and their solutions in a really unique manner. So that might be the official telecom or technology partner, the official bank or insurance, or official sustainability. We just did, I think there'll be a slide in a bit, we found a sustainability B2B partner last year in Phoenix, the arena there, and that was built on a sustainability platform where that company footprint was able to take their products and services and use the arena or use the district as a showroom. And that's what we really build here, is getting away from sort of the old school way of thinking about sponsorships. Next slide. And what a lot of organizations, municipalities, real estate, universities, and alike, they think of what we do when it's not a short-term sponsorship. When we do the naming rights of the district or potentially of the training facility or other what we call large founding partner categories, when you do long-term deals, there's a phrase that's now been commonplace. Dan and Steve and others in the room can probably share a little bit about their experiences. We call it contractually obligated income, COI. And if you notice in the diagram here, that's the orange box. So traditional ways of financing projects is through either debt or equity or bonds or things of that nature. And what we're able to do is when we can go out and get long-term partners, brands, we can actually convert those deals into a financing tool that will allow you, the city, to be able to then take that long-term revenue stream and collateralize it to then be able to do these types of projects that we're talking about here. COI. Next slide. Okay. Next slide. So the city of Charlotte, you guys have an incredible opportunity now. You are one of the fastest growing and most popular regions, cities in the United States. We know that clearly, that brands are looking to move in. Brands are trying to figure out how to market. And what we are finding now is that you have an opportunity, especially with some of your industry sectors and finance and sustainability and the like, to attract some brands that don't even know they have the opportunity potentially to align themselves with the city. Next slide. So in our study that we had prepared, we identified some what we call high value assets or high value opportunities. And these are just a sampling of the 6 of them. One would be the district naming rights. The way we say is that anyone can put their name on an arena or a stadium, but how many brands can put their name on a city or part of a city or a district? And we've had a lot of success working with brands to differentiate. And so we see the district naming rights as a really interesting opportunity for you guys to attract a brand that wants to be integrated in with your asset in that piece of the property. The other one is the performance center naming rights, the training center. We typically see that in healthcare and other industry sectors as a really good asset. And then there's other high value assets as well. We call them landmarks, entitlement zones, mini naming rights deals. And you'll see a few of those below as well. I don't need to get into the details. And there's many, many more as well. And these would be, when you think about the hierarchy, you think about the district naming rights, the training center naming rights, but then we'll do foundational city partners that will also be part of this as well to maximize your long-term COI revenue. And I think you guys wanted to see a couple case studies. I think I mentioned one, the next page. So this was the Footprint Center. Footprint was a sustainability organization that we transformed the whole area there into naming rights opportunity. Next one. TD Place. This was one in Ottawa, Canada. And this was an interesting one because they had their arena and they had their stadium that they're renovating. And TD, which had over 98% of the people in Canada knew TD. Think of it as Bank of America in your backyard. But what we did there is we helped TD think differently about integrating their financial product solutions into the district, and we ended up naming it TD Place. Another one here, Toyota Music Factory. That one's in Irving, Texas. Once again, that became a mixed-use development project that Toyota put their name, headquartered right outside the area. Toyota Park was another one that our group had worked on years ago as well. And you can notice it's not just the naming rights, it's the other partners and sponsors that also represent the district as well. So it's really turning your asset into what an owner of an arena or stadium or a team has, but those are your assets that you control. Next one. This is a recent one that we were just involved with in Nashville. Ascension St. Thomas, we worked with them, and that was just one of many, many sponsors there. That's going to be a mixed-use development project with an amphitheater, hotel, and Ascension, we did the naming rights to a little park area that was in the district. A very significant partnership over many, many years for just a piece of the district. Not the naming rights of the whole thing. Ascension just got a piece of it, a landmark area. Okay? We had many, many more, but we wanted to make sure that we got you through your 2-hour meeting, and I'm available for any questions.
Just add one thing. So hopefully with this, what you'll start to see is, again, the layers of opportunity and revenue generation that we can work with this, and how we've then kind of backed into a number that we feel like we can support annually with the practice facility.
Okay. Jeff, thank you very much for the presentation. Now we'll open the floors for questions and answers from committee members first, and now I recognize Councilmember Ashmere.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of questions. Jeff, a great presentation and seeing the case study. I really like that this is a creative tool that is helping us figure out how do we do big projects and address community needs with creative solutions. And I know this is something we've never explored before, so I'm excited to see. I know, Jeff, you mentioned this is contractual that turns into something where we can do our debt, issue a debt based on these projections. How long this model has been in market, and have you seen any challenges from the operations perspective or from the commitment being that fulfilled?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you so much for that and our presentation. A couple of things to answer. So number one, COI, contractually obligated income. This term has been around for a while, and it really started to become popular years ago. If you started to see a lot of new arenas and stadiums coming up in the United States when public financing was really falling out. So what was ended up happening is that owners of their teams that owned their arenas had to figure out how to finance new arenas and stadium projects where cities were stopping to pay some public financing. And then all of a sudden, municipalities said, well, hold on a second, why don't we start to think about doing that as well? We have those assets. And so we have worked with a lot of groups to say, let's think about it no differently than these billionaire owners and how they're leveraging their assets to go get brands to spend a lot of money over a lot of years. And why don't we do that as well? So it really did start sort of in the kind of the private sector, municipality sector. And then now I think it's something that's prevalent. And the most important thing, though, is the long-term nature of the deal. And what we like is because since now you're tying it to a lease extension, your timing is really perfect to be able to then also offer your assets now, the district, the training center, and others to coincide with those extensions.
So to follow up on that, Jeff, some of these mobility opportunities that you had presented, I would be interested in seeing if you're using some of our city assets, for an example, transportation assets, or just the district naming rights, how could some of this also be used to address our other issues that we have and other important priorities, especially our transportation? But that's a conversation for another day, but I would like our staff to explore some of those solutions and tools to address our community needs. But I look forward to hearing more, but I really like what I see in terms of a different tool to address just big projects that we have. Thank you.
Well, I'm really glad you said that. I'll just take up maybe 30 more seconds because I think it's really important. We ended up working with the city of San Francisco years ago and helping them do the Salesforce transportation hub that was right outside of the new Salesforce Tower, generated significant revenue. If you think about emerging industry sectors in electric vehicles and mobility and sustainability, I couldn't agree with you more that anytime that you can take a brand and not just have them in the arena or in the district, but expand them to the entire city, good things can happen because now you're actually doing something that an owner of a team can't do, and you're creating a much broader city partnership. And that way, and if you think about it, brands don't just do sports. Brands have healthcare. Brands have transportation. Brands have many other industry sectors, and you can offer those where maybe a sports team can't. We're doing something right now outside of San Francisco with the Presidio, and we're creating the first ever smart park. And that is attracting brands who want to be associated with a new industry sector. So thinking about your parks and recs and others, not just transportation, is something that you can consider down the road.
Johnson wanted to add a comment as well.
Thank you.
I think Jeff covered it really well. The only thing I wanted to say is, we definitely look at opportunities for new tools. And so I think if we can prove this concept out as we work through this, that yes, it's absolutely a tool that we might be able to use in other places for other projects.
Thank you. Councilmember Wallington.
Thank you, Chairman Graham. I too am interested with the possibilities of what we could do here. I do get a little bit uneasy when I hear the idea of just putting a brand on your city, because certainly we at Charlotte have a brand and a culture here and a competitive advantage as a city. And so as you spoke a little bit more in response to Councilmember Esmira's question, I became to get a little bit more comfortable with understanding how do we really integrate these partners, not only branding, but how do they help drive our community needs? I think that's going to be the key for me when I think about what this value actually can be beyond just dollars for a particular company or offsetting the tourism fund, is how do we leverage these partners to actually deliver community benefit? So that's going to be of interest to me. To that end, I'm interested in understanding who exactly is going to be in a position to determine who the partners are, like who's actually issuing the contracts.
Well, first of all, let me address the first part, and then Tracy, if you want to address the second part, if you'd like me to, I can tell you what other similar municipalities and cities have done. But we couldn't agree with you more. I mean, the whole idea here is getting away from just slapping logos on signs. It's really around product solution integration and working with brands to say, you don't need to overexpose. In fact, customers and the next generation, they're so savvy, they actually don't want that. So we work with you, and then we would work with the brand to come up with something that feels right. And the last thing I'll say is you guys get to determine every asset, every category, every company. And so the good news on this is that there is that control that you guys have at the end of the day to make sure the look and feel represents your city.
Ms. Dodson, you want to add something to it?
Yeah, Councilmember Watlington, just, and I'll let the consultants answer as well. I think the way that we're looking at this is that we would have a team work with a third party like a Jeff and IPG to bring us the opportunities, and then we together would shape this out. And when I say it's a team, we want to respect our partners. We want to respect the CTC developers that are in this project. We want to respect the Hornet side that's in this project. So I think everybody's got to be comfortable with who we bring and how we shape this out. But at the same time, we would very much be at the forefront of that.
So to that end, I would really, really like to see us begin with the end in mind, as Chairman Graham likes to say often. What do we see for this district as a whole for the city? Not just the partners that are around the table today, but our grassroots community, our residents. If we can get very clear defining who we want to, or what we want to see here, it'll be a lot easier to determine who we want to attract or who we want to accept. So that's a piece that is going to be critical for me, is understanding what's the long-term vision here and how does it serve the needs of everybody in our community? How does it fit our equity aims? How does it fit our Comp 2040 plan? Because this feels like an opportunity to really make tangible our vision. I did have a follow-up question to the revenue projections, and forgive me if I missed it. I just want to understand, do we have an idea of, we know we said 60 million. I just would like to understand a little bit more about the rationale for 60 million. Do we have an ROI in mind or some kind of revenue projections? What's that looking like?
Ms. Dodson?
Well, Jeff, do you want to talk a little bit about the analysis that you did from the conservative side to the aggressive side? And I think you started to hit on it. I know you probably don't have the numbers right in front of you, but
Yeah, I do.
the layers.
Yeah, I'm happy to. First, let me address the first part of the question pretty quickly, and then we'll get into the revenue side, which is always, all of us want to hear that as well. That is exactly right. I mean, if we are building this district as a community asset, then ultimately, I believe it's going to drive even more value to brands. And we talked about earlier about going away from the traditional sponsorship assets and non-traditional, and using this as a community asset for we call human capital or employees. Having a brand be able to come in and allow their employees to be able to use it, being able to create with local school districts and field trips, and being able to show off how a technology company is powering this entire district or little mini city, or how a fintech company is showing folks how they're using their products or services. So I think if done right, this becomes a really, really next generation community asset. And I think brands are going to want to be attracted to that because it's different and unique and it's forward thinking.
And I would take it one step further before you answer the second part of my question.
Yeah.
I would love to see tiers of sponsorship so that we can really get in some of our local organizations and our small businesses. That would be fantastic. If it wasn't just the big corporate players and whoever they brought to the party, but if there were places and ways to buy in for our local businesses.
Well, you literally just teed me up for the second part of that question.
Fantastic. Let's get it.
That was awesome. I think you got it in front of you, huh? The book. So the way we do the analysis is it's hard, right? It's like it's putting a jigsaw puzzle together. And if you get one organization to come in and buy a lot of things, and maybe there's less assets available for others. So we like to create a hierarchy. And right now, if you think about the hierarchy, at the highest level is the district naming rights. And that has been estimated in the low 7 figures annually, and let's say over a 10-year period. We did a project years ago in Canton, Ohio, the Johnson Controls Hall of Fame Village ended up being, less than $1 million a year. We thought for 10 years, we ended up doing over 100 million, actually way more than that. And that was because we created a smart city for them. So it's really hard to kind of figure out, but we like to kind of estimate what we think the market and other benchmarks have. So we've put the district at a couple million a year. But that depends on the category and the assets. And at the end of the day, you guys select and choose. So, if we can add more assets or get a little bit more forward thinking and maybe do things that other cities haven't, yeah, we might be able to crank that number way up. If we want to fall a little bit more traditional and not give as much, then it might go down. But that's the one level. In the training center, we've estimated also at a low seven-figure annual number as well. And then what we call founding city partners. And I think we had 5 in our analysis. And those, if you add those 5 up annually, and we do 5-year, 10-year deals, depending on how we can do, those then become in the 7 figures as well. Then you have another tier that would just be sponsors of the district. Then you can have just media partners or just experiential partners. And that's what you were just saying, is creating a system and a hierarchy that will allow those assets to be bundled based on different tiers of companies. So to recap, highest level are the 2 naming rights. Next level might be 5 or 6 very large foundational, official auto, official insurance, official banking. And then there might be that next level down, which are sponsors, and then some of the lower tiers.
Awesome, thank
But
you.
when you add them all up, it gets to that number that you guys were projecting.
Thank you. The last thing I'll say on this is I think that drives us to even think about how we use some of the flex space and what we enable people to come in and be able to do there. So I'd love to see beyond some of the things that are already listed, how we can utilize space so that different types of partners can come in. Thank you.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Ms. Wall.
and what you said earlier with the other council member was right on. We're just talking about the district. Can you imagine if this is phase 1 and you want to then open up phase 2 down the street to the healthcare area that you're working on, or to your parks, or to your transportation hubs, or to your airports? Before you know it, you can actually create a city partnership program that well expands and start to layer in your different assets over time.
Absolutely. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Wallington. You took several of my questions, so that's a good thing as well. We'll go to Councilmember Driggs, and then we'll pivot to Mr. Winston in the room.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There is a naming rights agreement in place right now with Spectrum. So when does that expire, or how would anything that we do here affect our relationship with Spectrum?
So let me answer that, and then I'll kick it to Dan if you have anything to add for the Hornet side. We have been very intentional not to touch anything that is part of the arena. That those naming rights still stick with the Hornets, and that we intend for that to continue. What we're talking about is kind of everything outside of the arena walls. Dan, do you have anything to add to that? Okay.
Right. I think that's enough. I just wanted to clarify that. So when we talk about the district, it doesn't include the arena, right?
Correct. We're looking at the district as being in the arena, but that's not part of what we're talking about with these sponsorship opportunities.
And Spectrum does not feel that the value of their sponsorship is somehow affected by our sale of these nearby or related assets?
Not that I know of. I'm looking at Dan if there's been any conversation.
No, there hasn't been any conversations, but I would think that partners within the arena would likely be very interested in this opportunity to expand.
So, I think it's great that we want to pursue this novel approach. We need all the help we can get. At the same time, I don't think going down this road is without its pitfalls. So without being able to kind of deal with all that, and I'll just mention in passing, I thought Coca-Cola on the back of Santa Claus's chair was more than I was, going to be prepared to stomach. So we need to be careful about who the city forms these partnerships with and what those relationships say about us. There are issues where sometimes companies get into reputational trouble, and do we want to be associated with that? So I think all I need to know for right now is if we proceed today, we are not committing ourselves to the fulfillment of the $60 million for these arrangements. And Tracy, I think you mentioned as a contingency that we could still work something out with the team if we didn't sell the naming rights. Is that still true?
I'm not sure. We would have to look for other revenue sources if we did not sell naming rights. But I want to get back to the first part of what you were saying is if we were to proceed with this and this approach, then we would start working on this and we would bring back a larger proposal specific to naming rights in the district and all the pieces to council for consideration. So again, we want to include you in that process and for you to have the ability to understand before anything would be finalized on that.
But was our deal with the team based on today's votes depend on our successful implementation of the sale of naming rights?
Yes. And if we wanted, if you said you did not want to do naming rights, we would have to talk about potentially other revenue sources to fund the 60 million for the Performance Center.
Right. I just think we should all be clear that there's a lot of questions when you get into the details on the naming rights and who our partners are and things like that, that we're not going to be able to answer today. And therefore, I wanted also to be clear about whether we're leaving ourselves any wiggle room on the $60 million to the extent that as we get further into this, you know, the one or the other partner is not suitable in the minds of council. And from what I'm hearing, we are, if we vote today, we are committing ourselves to the concept of the naming rights, and we are relying on our ability to achieve the revenue that we're talking about here. And we don't have anybody's commitment that parties that will pay these amounts have been identified, right? I mean, this is an idea right now, but we're banking this idea. Is that a fair statement?
That is a fair statement. Jeff, will you talk through a little bit about kind of timing? Let's say that we were, council gave the nod that they wanted to proceed with this approach, and you know, your company and how you do this, you hit the ground running, kind of timing for putting some of that together, because I think it's important that they understand that, you know, when we think some commitments would come online.
Yeah, no, thanks, Tracy, and it is a great question. So we do it in a phased approach. So if council wanted to proceed, the next steps would be to take a lot of the good work that's already been done and move that into sort of what we would call phase 1B, which is the actual build out of the commercial plan. What are the rights and benefits? What are the categories? What are the actual companies? And what are the different platforms and programs, whether it would be sustainability or integrated in technology. And so that typically takes about 90 to 120 days. And as we're building that up, that then gets us to the point where we go to market. And go to market can be anywhere from a few months, and I've seen it anywhere to a couple of years. And it really depends on market environments. It depends on how focused effort is and how quickly do you want it done. The Phoenix Sun one, we did it in 93 days. The Johnson Controls Hall of Fame Village, we did it in 45 days.
It's okay, and you know, I'm not necessarily saying this is a reason not to proceed, but I do think we need to be clear. As I said before, the city is making a commitment in the near term, and the backup for that will come true over the span of a period of time, as you just described, right? But we're putting that $60 million out there, and the issue of whether we achieve that or whether we like the way that we're able to achieve that is on us. The team is expecting the $60 million, right?
Well, I mean, I believe that's the case, but if you think about it, Councilman, is you have assets, right? So you have an asset, whether it sells or doesn't sell. So not to put this out there because it doesn't make sense, but if you had to, and the team wanted to go acquire those rights and sell those for you, if for some reason it didn't get sold, you have asset value. You have other ways to monetize. You could actually even have a third party acquire those rights if you needed to. The difference though is that you're losing control of what partners you might want to bring in. They might bring in someone that gives us a little bit of a pause, but at the end of the day, you have an asset that you can monetize.
I get that. I'm just saying that there's a certain kind of uncertainty there. I have a banking background, and what I'm saying is we are banking this deal, right? We are underwriting our ability to realize $60 million. And I guess my next question for you is the COIs, it's contractually obligated income, but we can't actually securitize that, right? So we can't create a special purpose company, non-recourse, et cetera, and get investors to buy those cash flows, or is that how it works?
You absolutely can do that. So I was just back, I mentioned 3 weeks ago in Barcelona with Goldman Sachs, and I was in a week of meetings with the credit rating companies and the big institutional investors, and that's exactly what they're doing. The Johnson Controls, which was owned by, it was city and state public financing money that went into it. Once again, Goldman Sachs underwrit that one as well. So yeah, there is precedence for doing that.
Steve wanted to jump in.
That's where I used to work. And so lastly on that, you mentioned the rating agencies. How do the rating agencies treat this debt that is supported by those cash flows on a non-recourse? So these are revenue bonds that we would issue presumably from a special purpose company. How do the rating agencies regard that in terms of their assessment of the other debt issued from our hospitality funds? Is it completely unrelated?
I can't answer that because I don't believe the city has.
We're going to let Dave answer that question for us with Inner Circle Sports.
Sure. Councilman Driggs. So I think there's a bit of confusion. Securitization, like you, and I'm also in the banking business and understand securitization is where you actually pledge the contract to as collateral to investors. What Jeff's talking about is not necessarily securitization of the contracts. It's using those revenues as a part of a larger revenue stream as a pledge to debt holders. So it doesn't necessarily need to be a specific securitization. So the rating agencies look at those transactions a little bit differently. The first securitization done in the United States for a sports facility was for the Pepsi Center in Denver. And that actually was a pledge of collateral of the actual contracts securing both naming rights and all of the majority sponsorship agreements, pledged to bondholders or to debt holders. It was rated by the major rating agencies. The next deal was the Staples Center, very similarly done in the United States. There aren't that many in the United States to get done. In Europe, it's a very, very more comfortable way to do business because of the lack of public financing. So when we're talking about using campus sponsorship here, those contracts are unlikely to be securitized in the way you know them and then pledged to debt holders. It's actually more likely that we will enter into a lease agreement with the developer, with the CTC developer, and use our revenue from the campus development, campus sponsorship that Jeff's speaking about as a pass-through to pay our lease payment. So it's a little bit different transaction.
Okay,
right. It's a secured loan and not a secured loan, meaning a collateralized loan, but the obligation of the city or of the CRBA as opposed to this non-recourse thing is what I'm getting at. So even though these are contractually obligated, this is contractually obligated income, we can use it as collateral, but not as a basis for a non-recourse, or we would not normally use it as a basis. Yeah. And I won't hold up this meeting any longer, but I'm interested in these contingencies and what possible exposures the city might have based on the sequence of events and the structure. And I may kind of follow up on that one offline. But I think that's all the questions I have. The other question then, which is related to that, is does this affect our borrowing capacity for the purposes of our debt rating? When you create a new revenue stream and you immediately commit it to a new debt, you have leveraged yourself a bit, right?
Yeah, Councilman, I'm going to defer to Teresa on this, but I don't believe that we haven't put together a structure yet that would actually create an obligation from a debt obligation. This is more of an operating obligation or a lease obligation to make a payment to the developer for the performance center. So I don't think it will have a negative impact on the city's debt rating or debt capacity. However, I'm going to leave that to your city finance director and to your city's financial advisor. When we get to that point, that is a very relevant question, and we'll be presenting that in depth back to the city when we get further along in this process.
Thank you, Councilmember Driggs. Steve, you were trying to get into this conversation at some point. Do you have any comments you want to make?
Yeah, the only one I was going to make a comment on is every one of these contracts will have what we usually call a Disneyland clause, so that the city's going to get comfortable with whoever buys these sponsorship rights, and it's going to exclude companies you're not going to want to do business with. And it's not uncommon in this industry. If something happens in the future, like Enron in Houston, Enron Field, you take their name off, and that's all in the contracts.
Okay, thank you. We're going to pivot to Councilmember Winston and then Councilmember Phipps, and then we're going to close out this section because we got 4 others to go.
Mr. Graham, it looked like Ms. Smith was going to comment on Mr. Drake's last question. I would like to hear that answer before I start my questions, please.
Ms. Smith, do you have any comments?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Winston. No, I was just going to echo and say we are early in the stages for this, but as David said, this would just be considered another revenue stream. So we're not looking to do a separate revenue bond or to put any additional impact on our credit that way. And we will definitely be working with our financial advisor as we get closer into this to make sure that we structure this in a way that doesn't have that kind of impact on the city. So thank you, Mr. Winston.
Thank you.
All right, the floor is yours, Mr. Winston.
Thank you. A couple things. Mr. Marks keeps mentioning Barcelona, and he did mention that there's a lack of public investment there, but I would caution council members and the mayor to take a look at some of the things that have been happening in Barcelona as it relates to branding, sponsorship, especially around smart cities, technology and innovations. He mentioned some of those things. There was a strong, I guess, approach like this over the years, but after a term or two, the public sentiment quickly shifted that there was a lot more corporate benefit for the strategies that were being implemented versus public benefit. And if you see how the policy has changed in Barcelona, it has really taken, snatched back some of the strategies for different types of corporate sponsorship that wasn't, the community wasn't reaping the benefits that were similarly promised at the outset of the beginnings of these relationships. So with that said, Ms. Dotson, I think we should take a look at what's been happening in Barcelona so we can educate us from the public policy standpoint of how we might deal with this and learn from the mistakes that the municipal government made in this similar situation. With all due respect, this is not new. We are the home of NASCAR, and this has been done with racing teams since outlaws were running moonshine. If on top of if you look at what has been going on in the arena, for instance, Jordan Brand is a sponsor of the arena, and they have a special relationship with the team and the NBA. They're able to, as Mr. Marks said, place their products in there despite other league-wide apparel and contracts. So we have familiarities with this, but I have kind of 2 issues, main issues, or concerns, I should say. One that I think has been brought up so far. My question is here: what is the full community benefit to this? With this being a public-private partnership, I do believe the community benefit should be equal or greater than the benefit to these individual sponsors. And I don't know how we quantify that moving forward, but I would like to. It makes it very, without being able to talk about that, it makes it difficult to go to the people of Charlotte and say, why we are selling the city to these corporate sponsors. Then I have concerns about sequencing about this, and this is less for our private partners here, more about how we're going about doing business as a city. I feel like this sponsorship strategy has to be policy driven. We have just funded an innovation district much of our conversation around entertainment districts has not been here, but it's been around third ward, the development in the third ward. We have made hundreds of millions of dollars of investment in Bowplex Complex and the Convention Center, and we know that there is more investment needed there. Now we are presented with this menu of what could be, but we have no public-facing strategy of how we are going to facilitate district development in general. You know, the new arena, the existing arena, has failed to spur private investment around and adjacent to the arena. If you look at Trade Street, you look at Fifth Street, you look at Caldwell, it pretty much looks pretty much the same, you know, as it did when the arena was first built. Why should we believe that selling naming rights to a private practice facility with no public use will spark new development that we have not been able to realize over the past 20 years?
Tracy, is that addressed to me? Would you like me to take that first, or would someone else like to?
Well,
anybody.
let me.
Ms. Dodson, then we'll go to the consultants.
Yeah, let me start with that. And one, Councilmember Winston, I don't necessarily disagree with you on developing some policy around this. I do want to say that this somewhat happened organically. We didn't start this process with the Hornets several years ago with this concept. It kind of evolved as the practice facility discussion came up, as the CTC redevelopment conversation came up. So it evolved for this particular project organically. It absolutely has been a part of a discussion on other projects. We just haven't gotten there yet. So this is the first one. Again, don't disagree with the potential for policy around it, but just that we didn't, again, go into it as this was a piece of the project in the beginning. It's just somewhat evolved.
Jeff, you want to give it a try?
I mean, I think that there's some really good points that are taken here, and it sounds like the councilman has a lot of good experience in this area. I think this whole thing is a public benefit, and there are rights and benefits. We mentioned the programs and platforms that can be built that get away from a traditional naming rights. It's about advertising and creating something much more of a community asset that a brand will love it because the community will be using it. You know, we talked about other programming aspects of the district as well, not just for arena events, but 365. So it actually does become something of a community asset that can be used all the time. And then lastly, I would just put in perspective that when cities have sports teams, that creates a lot of brand equity for that city and a lot of pride for its constituents. And you look at the case study that happened in Seattle years ago, and they've still, from this day on, have been paying a big price when they thought that their basketball team was not going to leave, and they ended up leaving to another city in Oklahoma City. And they, to this day, have spent so much money, they've spent so much effort to try to get it back. And in fact, it really is a community asset if you think about it from that standpoint.
Follow up, Mr. Winston? All right.
I'll listen to Mr.
Dan?
Barrett.
Dan?
Thank you. I think you bring up a really interesting point about development around the arena. We represent cities all across the country. And one of the big things that we try to focus on is the development around the arena and making these projects about redevelopment and revitalization. We did it in San Diego. We did it in Sacramento downtown. We did it in Milwaukee with the Deer District. And what I can tell you is if you build an arena or a stadium out in the middle of a cornfield and just leave it there and hope that development occurs, you're going to have an arena, a parking lot, and cornfields.
Well, we have plenty of experience with that as well.
Right. And so what I'm getting to is that these projects have to be master planned. And I think what's critical to this is not the district naming rights or sponsorship opportunity, but it's redevelopment of the CTC. That's what's going to spur the development around the arena or continue the growth of the development in this area. And what's critical to the developer as these discussions were going on was, one, that the Hornets were part of the building, two, that the Hornets had a long-term extension in the building, and that three, an investment was being made in that arena to make sure that they were next to a vibrant facility that was going to compete regionally with other buildings around the area. And so what I would say is, the CTC is really an important element to that redevelopment and continued growth that you'd like to see in this area.
I'll end. I think Mr. Barrett hit the nail on the head with the term that I was trying to get at, is master plan. But I would expand our breadth, and this is why I say from our perspective, our master plan has to be much broader than just the Spectrum Center. This idea of the entertainment district in the 3rd Ward, the development that's happening at Eastland, the Bowplex, the investments that are going to need to come down the line at the convention center to continue to compete against other cities. We need this to be policy driven, and it feels like we just this has just been thrown at us, and it's not following any type of an overall plan that, again, we can go back to our constituents and say, this is how it's going to fit into the bigger goals and the bigger public benefit that we need to present. So I have concerns about this. I hope that we can maybe at least start going down that path or figure out how we get to on that pathway before we approve this deal. Thank you.
All right, we've been batting this ball since 12:19, and we still have Mr. Phipps and Councilmember Larkin. We'll have to final remarks on this. Councilmember Phipps.
Yeah, thank you. I just, it's an interesting conversation. It's obvious to me that in order for this naming rights bill to be in place, we just got to have, the Hornets have to be in the mix. So, but one thing I wanted to know, that I asked the question last week, was up to $376 million in economic impact of that Spectrum Center. What percentage of it is attributable to the Hornets, and what percentage is attributable to ancillary uses? I was hoping somebody could answer that for me today.
Ms. Thompson?
Councilmember Phipps, we'll get you the answer before we conclude here today.
Thank you.
Councilmember Larkin?
Yeah, I was just going to point out on the topic of development that has or hasn't occurred around the arena that we need to look in the mirror on that to some degree, because 2 of the largest parcels adjacent to the arena are city-owned, and we've not done anything to invest in those parcels. Not saying necessarily we should have up to this point, but development can't occur on city parcels unless we decide that it's going to. There also, since the time that that arena was built, have been 2 hotel properties that have been built adjacent to the arena, another that we approved probably in 2018 that would have been built but for COVID. So there's a number of things. The Federal Reserve is right across the street. Obviously, they're probably a long-term tenant on that parcel. So I think there has been some investment around the arena, but part of the reason there hasn't been is because we've decided not to maximize the assets we have as a city. And now I think we're trying to change that by doing more with one of those parcels than we've historically done.
Mr. Graham, can I correct the record one time? That's just not true. We received an unsolicited bid for the CTC, which we decided not to, which has sparked a lot of this conversation. So the parcels that we do own, that has not precluded private development on those parcels if the private capital has seen it as a worthy investment.
Tim, you'll get the last word on this topic. Julie?
I'm sorry, the first part cut off. I'll just say real quickly, I do have concerns about that concept of master plan when when we have no idea what's going to come with Epicenter and the parking lots that we own. But I'll leave it at that. Look forward to the rest of the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so we had a good discussion on sponsorship opportunities and the revenue. All minds and soul are aligned based on where you sit, right? So we are different, where you sit different from where I sit, right? But we had the discussion. So folks had their questions asked and answered, and based on what you asked, right? So we're there. So we'll pivot to the Charlotte Transportation Center. We'll invite John to come to the table with us, and we'll turn it over to Ms. Dotson for the introduction of this segment.
Thank you. Before we jump into this, I know that Jeff's going to jump off. Want to thank Jeff Marks for his time and being a part of today and to answer those questions. So the end of that conversation is a great segue into the CTC development. And before we jump into it, I want to remind everybody what I said last week, which was, if I go back 3 years ago, I had several individual conversations that were going on. The work on the arena and the assessment of the arena was occurring. At the same time, I was talking to Mr. Whitfield with the Hornets about a practice facility, and he had actually asked about the gravel lot that's beside the Federal Reserve. We had just taken ownership of it, and we were actually looking at that lot in itself. Simultaneously, there were conversations that were occurring around CTC, two to be exact, one about public safety with CTC and Epicenter, and then two about the unsolicited bids that were coming in for CTC. CTC, you'll hear me say it a bunch of times, is a transit project first. So that's where we started working with that. The public safety conversations at the time led us to work with the former owners of Epicenter. And so we have been thinking about multiple parcels in this area for quite a while. Did we have an exact vision? No, we did not. But part of it is because some of this has just evolved. COVID hit and really kind of determined that the development potential in the market for the gravel lot was more difficult. The CTC project, for example, continued to move forward, and we felt like does have market opportunity. Our conversations around Epicenter halted, obviously, with the situation that's happening there. But we look forward to working with the new owners on that project, just like we were working with the former owners. So the district concept has evolved. Again, I'll admit there is no specific plan, but we've been thinking about how all these parcels work together, but also trying to seize the opportunities as they've been in front of us. So with that, can we go to the next slide? So, John, I'm going to give you the opportunity here to speak because, again, CTC started several years ago where we started seeing proposals to come in for the redevelopment of the facility. And John and I really just started talking. I don't think it was necessarily on Katz's radar. And we said, well, wait a minute, if there's an opportunity to get a new facility plus a mixed-use development with development above it, should we look at this opportunity? And we decided that we thought we should. Here, I'll give you the...
Sure. Thank you, Tracy. And for the record, John Lewis, Executive Director of the Charlotte Area Transit System. And I think, as Tracy has outlined, this really has evolved into a nexus of transit need and the opportunity for economic development and meeting other city goals. All have come to confluence at this location. With our study of our redesign of our transit system, the Envision My Ride program, we really began to understand that there was a critical need for moving our transit system away from that traditional hub and spoke model that required so many of our customers to take a bus down to the transit center, get off one vehicle, cross the apron of the transit center, get back on another vehicle just to leave the uptown area. And so with that system redesign in 2018, where we have implemented more direct routes, less dependence on the transit center, and what is also very important, has not been discussed yet thus far in this conversation, is the parallel need or development of the Charlotte Gateway Center. From a transit system standpoint, we're looking at a complete redesign, as I mentioned, that will allow us to be less focused on a central hub, more dispersed throughout of the city and the region, and the need to recognize that this current transit center was opened in 1995. We're getting pretty close to the useful life of this center, and what we would have to do to, from a catch standpoint, to really, from an investment standpoint, to realize that new and evolving vision for public transit at this location. We knew that the current transit center has outlived its utility from a mobility standpoint. And so all of that happened around the same time and gave us an opportunity to meet a transit need, but also to leverage this property and this opportunity to meet some other goals of the city.
Thank you. So now we want to walk you through what the CTC project is. And then we'll show you towards the end how the Hornets component fits into that. But again, this really has been a transit project that we've run on a parallel path. We just found and came across the opportunity to bring the practice facility and performance center into this development. So with that, next slide. As we mentioned, this was an unsolicited bid. We received 3 proposals in total, and ended up going with the development team of White Point Partners and DART Interest. DART has a global investment and development family office. This is the U.S. arm. They have projects throughout the country that range from towers in New York City to resorts in Florida. We really liked the experience that they brought, but they were also new to market, which was another piece that was interesting for us. If we can go to the next slide. They teamed up with White Point Partners, and White Point is a Charlotte-based development group that has done projects like Optimus Hall, and really brings a lot of that local experience. And so the 2 teams together, we felt like were a strong team. There was another reason, and we'll hit on this as we go through it, but it's important to mention, one of the things that was very important to John, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, was that we did not have to drastically change the operations of the bus system. White Point and DART own an adjacent piece of property that allows us to do the temporary facility while the CTC project is being rebuilt. Next slide. As we looked and worked with White Point and DART, we looked at precedents around the country. Victory Park is a perfect example. And if we go back to what Dan said earlier, that partnership as both projects between the arena and a lease extension started to become a point of discussion, as well as what CTC was for adjacent properties, again, brought the conversation of these precedents. Next one. Another example is Georgia Street in Indianapolis, what it could be at all times, 365 days of the year as a community gathering space, not just on NBA championships or big events, but 365 days a year. Next slide. So this is what CTC looks like today, and this is what the district looks like today if we kind of pull back and think about it. If we go to the next slide, this is the start of what we want to become. Like I said, this is a transit and mixed-use project, first and foremost. I will remind everybody these drawings are conceptual, so we've been working through the design. It's important to keep that in mind, but I also want to demonstrate that there's a lot of design work and a lot of thinking that has gone through to this site and how this site functions as a transit project first and foremost, with the mixed-use project above it. Next slide. We'll show you another angle of how we think that the project can come to be. And it really shows you here, you can see the opportunity of Brevard Street and what can happen along here as it terminates right at Trade Street. Next slide. So as I mentioned, the temporary facility is important. This is the existing CTC site right here where it says future development. So the ability to come just across the street and develop an interim facility that doesn't impact John's operations was important. Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, and I think that was as Tracy mentioned, that was the top priority from a transit standpoint. The biggest impediment we had from a CAT standpoint was we knew this facility was reaching its useful life. It no longer fit in with our future plans, but how could we either make significant improvements to it or build a new transit center without significantly impacting our customers and our current transit operations? And this was really the key aspect of this unsolicited proposal, in that it allowed us to meet our future needs while minimizing the impact to our current customers by being able to locate a temporary transit center directly across the street. It maintains our connection to the Blue Line and Gold Line and continues to allow current operations, future operations under our current system design. Imagine if we had to locate a transit center somewhere else in the uptown area. It would have significant impact to our operations and our customer experience.
Thank you, John. So next slide, you can see that in these slides, we'll just show you a couple of slides here. CATS has really pushed on the team as a whole and the architects to make sure that we develop, even though it's 3 years, it needs to be something of quality for our citizens. And so you can see some of the design work that we've tried to put together to making sure that it has adequate shelter and is quality over those 3 years. Next slide. Street level. Again, just trying to think through the aspects of the temporary facility. Next slide. More angle. And then next slide, we'll just show you the plan again, with Block A being the CTC current site. Next slide. So then I want to move into the CTC site. So this is a rendering, again, remembering it's conceptual, of how we've thought about the bus facility. If the bus is underground, this is how you can arrive into the bus facility, go through the Oculus. What you see is looking towards Trade Street, which is also where the Blue Line comes down, and everything can converge right there at street level between the Gold Line, the Blue Line, and the bus facility. Again, you remember I said, and I've said it a bunch of times, this is a transit project first. We spent significant time looking at what was the most appropriate location for the bus. We looked at above grade so that it met at grade with the Blue Line. We've looked at grade for Trade Street and the street level, and then we looked at below grade and have spent significant time looking at the, again, engineering of this to make sure that it can work. John, you have anything from the CATS perspective?
And I think that the team did a great job in really exploring all the positives and negatives, the operational impact to our system of all three of those opportunities. The only thing I'd like to add is when you think about this below ground facility, I don't want you to think about it as a parking garage. Think more about it as like an airline terminal, where we have controlled access for our customers. We can have them in temperature-controlled areas with the amenities that they are needed to support this new vision. And our vehicles can get in and out and have design space for future technologies also.
Next slide. So this is a cross-section to try to show you again how these various uses come together. Bus, as I mentioned, the Oculus that we had in the last rendering, but then you also have the ability for now retail at the street level to flow out onto Brevard Street. And then you'll see back here the Blue Line and the Gold Line, and with the parking above, and then potential for other uses, i.e. hotel, office, or what we're looking at right now, but it could be residential. We are looking at the two towers with a mixture of uses in that. Next slide. Here's another image to how the bus would function underground on the below level, and the concourse that we mentioned again in the middle. And I really just show you guys these just so that you can understand that we really have been thinking through this. This is not kind of something that we're just starting. It's something that we have really spent a lot of time working through. Next slide. This slide will show you, again, how the blue line on the far right meets with what we call the grand staircase down to Trade Street. The Oculus comes up at the same place from the bus, and you have the gold line meeting at the Trade Street level. Again, really creating that nexus of activity that we talk about when we talk about the district too. Next slide. Some street level images, again, of how we think this can work. This is an image that you saw last week. Next slide. This image gets to thinking through how could we treat Brevard Street as a festival street, right? That was part of an early vision for Brevard Street many years ago. Really, that's now just starting to come to fruition as development occurs along it. Next slide. Diving in a little bit closer, again, ground level, where we can have a retail opportunity that bleeds out onto Brevard Street in the corner of Trade Street, with the various other components kind of pushed up against the rail line. Next slide. The image from Brevard Street. Next slide. Looking the other direction towards the convention center. Next slide is a street level, looking from the plaza across to the CTC redevelopment. Next slide. So then we get to the point where, again, we were focused on all the transit components. How do the transit components work at the grade level, above and below? The parking deck has always been that kind of middle section, and that always looked at 2 towers above. The question became, when we started to say, could the practice facility work in this project? And as Steve, still in Steve's great quote, we almost slide it in like a slice of salami into the project. And so you can see it here as we've slid it in to see if it works. And what's actually works well is that the courts and that roof structure that we need fits between the between the 2 towers that we've looked at. Next slide. And so you can see here as we start to lay out the practice facility, the courts here in the middle, and then you can see how it fits. This would be a base for the office tower or the base for like a hotel tower here, and they still fit into that. Last slide. And so with that, again, I want everybody to understand that we have been trying to think about this as the beginning of a district. CTC is much bigger than a practice facility. It's much bigger than a transit facility, but it has to be a transit facility first and foremost. So with that, I will stop and let anybody ask questions.
Thank you for the presentation. I recognize Councilmember Phipps.
Okay, I didn't notice. Others had their hand up first. Yeah, I was just wondering, over the weekend, I read an article in the paper about a traffic consultant, transportation consultant out of South Hill, really had some harsh words to say about the design of this this transit center. They basically said it was Charlotte's bus station plan is unhealthy, discriminatory, and a public safety nightmare. So I was wondering, had you all seen that article and offered any kind of response to the points that were raised by the consultant?
So, Councilmember Phipps, I have not seen the article that you're referring to. I would say that the only thing I would say is that if it's an article about the current design that we just showed you in terms of what we're trying to move towards, we've not really been public about that design, so not sure where those comments are coming from.
Yeah, Greg, do you know the source of it and the date?
Yeah, I could email.
It was Steve Harrison's weekly email newsletter on Friday.
Yeah, I can email it to you. So they obviously have the design, I mean, whatever's been presented, but it really does paint some interesting things that I think, need to be considered. I mean, I know an underground bus facility, I mean, I don't know. I mean, it sounds kind of, it doesn't give me great comfort to have it, a facility like that in the basement with all the other things on top of it. you know, so. But
Mr. Phipps.
It brings up some good, some things that I think needs to be beat back or clarified by us or whatever as we move forward with this possible plan.
Mr. Phipps, this is Vi. What did he say about the airport?
I didn't say anything about the airport.
Talk about the similarities of the design being underground and traffic being moved and whatever?
Well,
Okay,
they talked about.
that's fine. That's okay. I'll read it.
Yeah, I'll forward it to you if Larkin hadn't done it already.
John, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I think the only thing, having not seen or the article myself, I'll reserve the right to read it specifically and respond to specific points. But I think this is not something new in the transit industry. If you look nationwide, there are multiple underground bus facilities, and rail facilities by nature have been underground and operated very well. So I'll look towards these specific issues. If this is an exhaust issue, perhaps I would remind the council that we are in the midst of transitioning our fleet to a battery electric bus that really eliminates the concern for exhaust and fumes in that, but I'll take a look.
All right, Councilmember Gregg, are you done?
Yeah, I'm done.
Thank you for the questions. Councilmember Ajmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Phipps asked my question. Well, mine was specific around carbon footprint. And I understand that to Mr. Lewis' point, yes, we have a transition plan to electrify our fleet, but that's going to take, it's not going to happen overnight in next year or 2 or 3. So I think in that article, you'll see it makes a valid point about how do we address this issue of carbon footprint and this being a facility underground. So I would like a detailed response on that to keep everyone safe and healthy as they access our public transportation underground. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ajmer. Councilmember Drake.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Are you asking us to vote today and commit to this plan, or are we just voting on the contract with the team, or what action is council being asked for today?
So specific to CTC, there was a lot of questions last week. CTC is a different project that will come back to you all later this summer. But there were a lot of questions last week about the project as a whole. And so we just wanted to show you the concept design, where we were right now. But again, that's a separate project that will come back to you later this summer.
Right, so we could commit for the team and get the contract extension and do those things and still have our options open as far as the CTC, right?
Correct.
Because the Performance Enhancement Center is part of this, so I'm just wondering how they're linked.
So when we developed the plan for the Performance Enhancement Center to go to CTC, we always said that there would be a Plan B backup, and if that were to, if the CTC site for some reason did not work, we would go back to looking at the gravel lot as a practice facility design opportunity location.
Right, so maybe that's the thing I remembered that was the sort of the out or the contingency, was that if we couldn't make the CTC work, then our obligation to provide a performance center could change, right?
Correct. We would go to what we call Plan B. The one thing I will just say is I've asked from the Hornet side, let us pursue the Plan A in, through the summer. If we determine that for some reason it does not work, then we will revert to Plan B. I didn't feel like I had capacity or the team had capacity to look at Plan A and Plan B at the same time. So we've really been focused on Plan A for now.
As long as we keep working on the CTC, did we send out an RFP or anything, or did we just receive a proposal from somebody for this one?
We received unsolicited bids, and then as a part of that process, we have to advertise for that for a certain amount of time. John, you want to jump in?
That's correct. As a part of the federal requirements, since this is a federally funded site, once we received an unsolicited proposal that we believe meets our criteria, that adds value to our system, we then are required to solicit other competing proposals. And as Tracy mentioned, we did have 3 proposals that we evaluated during this process.
So we will get the benefit of an RFP type of process.
That is correct.
Yeah, thank you.
Councilmember Winston.
I'd just like to point out on a deal that is contingent on sponsorships and branding. It might be unwise to label something as the epicenter of transit. There's a double entendre there. And as we're approaching this as a performance enhancement center, if anybody's been a fan of sports over the past 20 years, that is a loaded term. I'd just like to point that out. I don't know how much confidence that is in branding moving forward. But I would just like to point out, specific to the CTC, I think those environmental issues are, we should take that seriously. I don't think the suggestion that transit has been doing something all over the country for a long time is sufficient, especially when you put an equity lens on the way transit has been developed in this country, and it has divided communities and made it harder for people who depend on transit to use it and less healthy. I think that's a significant consideration that we need to have going forward. I'll also say, from a person who has grown up using the Port Authority terminal in New York City, whether it's below ground or a bus facility above ground that is semi-enclosed, it is dirty, it is harsh, it is not the most pleasant facility to use. So I would like to see a commitment for especially if it's underground, that the only buses that are electric are committed to this facility. This should not be a facility that has hydrocarbon use in it. And it looks like Mr. Lewis would like to respond to that, so I'll give him.
Sure. I think just like to remind, we're still in the early parts of design on this. But all of those are important and high priorities for our design team. How do we create a new transfer facility in the midst of operating our transit system? And so it is, I think, the fact that we're in the midst of transitioning to a more sustainable technology, battery electric bus, gives us the flexibility to extend our design attributes for this that we probably wouldn't normally have. Looking at our long-term transition and our ability to fund that, I think we will add some fail-safes in that so that we don't lock ourselves into some things that we can't deliver. But our intention, and the great thing about bus, is that it is flexible. We can have our, fossil fuel vehicles perhaps go to the Gateway Center while we continue to move this, and or other facilities. So your point is well taken. We will have that as a part of our design, and I think the project that we bring back to you will more than answer those questions.
And the last question I have is about the actual viability of an underground terminal. When you start talking about developing underground in Uptown, we're talking about a lot of people don't know what's underneath until you get there. That prevents many types of development from happening when you have underwater streams and underground waterways that haven't been identified. In fact, we've had a conversation around transit around putting an underground tunnel specifically up Trade Street, and we said that has been not tenable or too expensive as we've considered things like the Silver Line. So why should we have confidence that we would be able to significantly develop underground at this location.
So, Councilmember Winston, I've got experience developing in and around Uptown, know very well, and have seen it in many projects of what you hit when you go underground. And so we have done some extensive research on what is underground in this particular block, because the one thing we know is for Uptown, it changes drastically from block to block. Exactly how deep we need to go. And also, as we look at our budgets, making sure that we have adequate contingency in there to prepare for anything that might not be foreseen. But again, having done projects where I've run into water at 18 feet underground or things like that, I know this all too well. And so we are trying to be as diligent in the planning and in the research of the site as we can be on the front end.
The only thing I would add to Tracy's response is that comparing this facility to a subway, we would have to go significantly deeper to meet the needs of developing a subway in here. And so we have done very specific soil borings and investigation into this specific site, but I think it is apples to oranges to compare it to what we would need to do in order to build an underground rail facility.
So am I hearing that we have done due diligence on this site, that we are confident that we can definitely do the type of underground development that would be needed for this type of a development?
I'm confident that we can do this type of development, yes. We have, and just to again reiterate it, we've done numerous soil borings. We know where we hit rock. We understand what's in the soil, but then have also on top of that had the team increase the contingency as it relates to underground, so that we don't hit a situation where you approve a project and we come back because there was something unforeseen on that. That it's really important that we understand what's under the ground before we start the project.
Thank you.
Councilmember Bakari will get the last word on this topic.
Thanks. Mrs. Dodson, I know that you haven't done the deep work yet on Plan B, but do you have any anecdotal color you could provide on the difference in the economics or challenges or risks between Plan A and Plan B?
So I will tell you where I came to back to the Hornets, and we made the suggestion to think about CTC as the site, because pre-COVID, I could see a market on the gravel lot site for office, residential, a mixture of uses that then could go into help supporting and paying for the CTC, for the Performance Center. So as the market shifted, I think it's a little bit of a harder play in having that particular lot be a strong office market play to that. Maybe it's a residential piece of it. So, one, I will tell you that I don't think the marketability of the site overall is as strong as the CTC site. The CTC site, I think, is right now one of the best sites that has a development opportunity in Uptown because of the transit access to it. That's number one. Number two, the land value is associated with the transit project. So we're eliminating that piece of the land value if you think about the cost for CTC, because that's part of the transit project piece. Does that make sense? Yep. So those are probably the two biggest things. The question that we asked to the Hornets is would they consider thinking about the CTC site? And would it fit? And so from the initial analysis, it fits. And we think it's kind of a win-win for both sides to be able to incorporate it into this.
Just some final guidance as you move forward to what is a condensed timeline, for me at least. I'm going to need to have much more confidence in the Plan B analysis, just because, picking up where we left off from last week's conversation, I don't necessarily have confidence in the foundation of CATS right now from a leadership perspective, that's going to be a viable approach if it's in the critical path of this ultimate deal. And, whether it's what we're looking at with Gold Line issues right now, with the audit that's out there right now from when we tried to sell and coordinate bus advertising. So I would hope that the advertising of multi-millions here isn't something that's being planned for cats while we have an audit that shows that we can't do that at much smaller levels right now. So I just have extreme challenge with anything cats related until we fundamentally fix that being in the critical path, especially something of this magnitude. So I hope you'll just keep that in consideration because my vote will deeply, deeply hinge upon that.
I'm happy to show you our analysis of Plan B.
Mr. Graham, can I ask one yes or no question?
Yes, sir.
Just that with the timeline that's been laid out on the negotiations with the Hornets, I guess is a Tracy question, there's not a need there's not a requirement for this council or the next council necessarily to be committed to whether or not the bus station is underground for us to move forward with the timeline you've laid out for the Hornets discussion, I'm assuming.
No, what we said, the Hornets are anxious to start to get to work, right? And so it's part of why we have this deal in front of you. And, if you approve this deal in the way that we have presented it, then we would start some work this summer. As we work through the summer, we'd work on the contracts and all of the necessary people to paper this. If for some reason between now and when we bring CTC back, CTC were to go away, I think we would pivot to Plan B and working Plan B. And so, we still have an option if for some reason CTC did not move forward with and working in the Plan B and still trying to keep the project as it's presented here to you today.
I just want to make sure people didn't think we were trying to make that decision so quickly or that we had to figure all that out before we could work on other pieces. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Very good questioning for item number B, Charlotte Transportation Center. Good questions, great understanding of where we're headed with that. And now we'll pivot to item C, and the rest of the items we should be able to go through relatively quickly. So let's go to item number C.
Yes, thank you, Councilmember Graham. We should be able to move through these next items quickly. With the community use, I asked Tom Murray, because Tom is probably closest to this portion of the existing operating agreement, to come in and talk about what's in the current operating agreement. And let me say one thing. The intent of this negotiation that we've had with the Hornets is not, we might make amendments and we might make extensions and things like that, but it was not to open up the entire operating agreement and redo the entire operating agreement. So we felt like when we talked about the community use, and I think Councilmember Graham, you were the one that asked it, it was important to talk about what's in the agreement right now and how we function right now with the community use of the facility. So with that, Tom, thank you for being here, and I'll turn it over to you.
Well, great. Just to talk a little bit about the existing agreement that we signed in 2003, January of 2003. It's called the Arena Use and Operating Agreement. In this 100-plus page contract, there are 6 pages that are dedicated to the use of this facility for community use and special uses. And so you can tell that quite a bit of detail was put into this. The intent in general is that we and our partner will mutually agree to do events that we think will be good for the city, but also good for them. But in some cases, on city event days, for instance, those events are more for civic and charitable causes and causes that would not be traditionally thought of as for-profit causes. So I think if you go to the next slide, you'll see the language here. There are really 2 different legal terms in here, and there are other definitions that go even further. But the CRV has the ability to reserve the use of the Spectrum Center for up to 12 days per year for civic or charitable uses, i.e. for graduations is the use that we've had since the beginning of our relationship, that we've used this city event day has been only used for graduations. based on the schedule of events provided by the team each year, showing NBA dates and other dates that have been reserved for arena events. You can imagine they have quite a long season, but on top of that, if you make the playoffs, the season could go well into the summer, and so it's difficult to schedule these types of events. City use days events can be scheduled no more than 207 days prior to the event and have to be signed within 45 days of the event. The CRVA will sign an agreement for those dates and will cover all out-of-pocket expenses incurred by the team in operating the arena for civic use. Now, obviously, we can pass those costs on to the CMS, for instance, with graduations. There's another term which is called special events that doesn't come with it free rent days. This is in this event this is where you would find something like the NBA All-Star Game or the CIAA or the DNC. The team agrees to cooperate with the city and the CRVA in efforts to bring significant regional and national events such as high-profile sports and entertainment events and citywide conventions. Special events will not be considered as city events. So what they're separating here is this access to free rent. Now, there have been occasions when we as CRV have subsidized rent and operating expenses for the Hornets, as we have in the past with the CIAA. So that is what is in our existing agreement. I shall say that with the Panthers, the Knights, and some of the other facilities that the city and the CRVA, using tourism taxes, have engaged in agreements with, this is a very common thing for us, but every language in each contract is slightly different. And so based on those negotiations, but for instance, with the Knights Stadium, we worked in conjunction with the baseball team to host the ACC baseball championship that just happened. And with the Panthers, we work with the Sports Foundation, the CRVA, and the Panthers organization to host events like the ACC football championship, the Duke Mayonnaise kickoff, and the Duke Bowl. So those are the types of things that we go after in conjunction with our partner, who will also benefit from those events.
Thank you, Tom. Oh, you got some more to go?
Do you want me to talk about the CIAA? Okay, so.
Yeah, just go through the whole presentation, then we'll come back.
Okay, great. So during the previous meeting, we had a question around the CIAA and what the CRVA was doing to get the CIAA back in town. So while we were speaking, or the next day, I guess it was, the CIAA had a announcement that they were extending their relationship with the city of Baltimore until the year 2025. They originally did a 3-year contract with Baltimore, and 2 of those years were affected by the pandemic, obviously, and so the intent was to give them 3 full years of operating. So we will, as we have in the past, respond to the RFP that will be released. It will be sometime in 24 or 25 that they release an RFP, and we will respond as we have in the past. We'll also work closely with having a host committee for the city that will have representatives from the county and the city organization. We've had in the past city council people on that host committee as well, and we will work together as a community to make sure that we put an aggressive bid in to try to ensure that the CIAA return to the city of Charlotte. So that's my answer to that question that was asked in the earlier meeting.
Okay. Thank you, Tom. I'll ask a couple questions, and I'll pivot to Councilmember Winston. So who approves our city event days? What's that authorization process?
So the contract identifies as the authority, meaning the CRVA.
Okay.
In the special events, it implores the Hornets to cooperate with the city and the authority on getting these events. So it's a little bit different. So in the original agreement, they signed authority for the city event days, and special events is a city and authority relationship. So in the case of CIAA, that would end up in special events section.
Okay. And that relates to the performance center itself, not being in the original contract. Will the city have any opportunity to utilize that facility if it's built?
We can talk to the Hornets about that. I'm looking at Dan and Steve.
I mean, it's not like it's got a lot of seats to be able to use or do something with it. I mean, I suppose if the team wanted to do a clinic for kids or something, you know, maybe something like that, but it's not something you'd lease out to a third party to go do an event there.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and then lastly, the CIAA, right? That's been a topic of mine and others for a while. Yeah, I get it. I had an opportunity to speak with the commissioner over the weekend, and what was decided was not really surprising to anyone involved, really, right? It was what was going to happen. I think that when it does come our way again, open for bidding, and I think I've told Tom this before, I think that we ought to put a compelling bid on the table, similar to every year for the last 20, 30 years, when the NCAA has their College World Series, everybody knows where it's at, right? It's in Omaha, Nebraska, right? Every year for years, the city has simply cemented that tournament in their community. And if and when we get the opportunity to bid again, hopefully our bid does the same thing, right? That it anchors that tournament in Charlotte. And that's a financial interest for sure that the city would have to bear. But I think it's a uniquely urban event. We have a historic Black college, which is a member of the conference less than a mile, 2 miles away from the facility. Certainly there's a lot as a community we have to do that we should have learned, like working with Mohammed and the HTA about hotel prices and when they go up and when they don't. Obviously, Charlotte and Baltimore are uniquely different in terms of our cities, what we have to offer. We have a lot to offer. Baltimore does as well. But we have our fair share of problems as well, too, right? And we have to respond appropriately as a community when there's violence in our community around guns and shootings not affiliated with the CIAA. I think we have to work with the CIAA about how they offer tickets, which is part of the problems that led to empty seats earlier in the week of the conference. How they distribute those tickets certainly impacted butts and seats on Monday and Tuesday and Wednesdays. So there are a lot of things that I think as a community we can kind of learn from our past experience. As a community, we all kind of get together and find a way to put our best foot forward. $50 million in February when no one's booking hotels and no one's traveling is significant business for any city. Hotels, busboys, waiters, small business owners, those who are promoting events. The third week in February, no one's doing that type of business. And so obviously, many of my constituents who operate in that space miss those revenues. Some businesses actually make their whole year in that week. And so obviously our loss is Baltimore's gain, but hopefully we got 3 years, 4 years to figure it out if we really want it. And hopefully the Hornets will be a partner in that for sure. Obviously, it's our building, right? And so we would love to focus on those special events and how we can work in conjunction with the Hornets to make that event possible in the near future. But we got years to figure it out, right? And so hopefully we would take advantage of the time that we have. Mr. Winston.
Thank you. I agree with Chairman Graham about the CIAA tournament and its relation here and comparing it to Omaha, Nebraska, and the College World Series. This should be the home of the CIAA. I'd also point out that North Carolina, as a state, has the most HBCUs of any state in the union. I would hope that we could engage our state partners on the importance of this tournament in the same vein of Omaha and the economic and cultural impact that this tournament has. Mr. Murray, I have a question about the city event days. How have we utilized those? And I'm referring to how many times have we gone 12 for 12 in use of those dates in the life of the arena? What's our percentage of use, I guess?
I don't think we've ever used all 12.
It's a shame.
We used 11 for the first 5 or 6 years, that we used 9 or 8. And then in recent years, there have been less uses. There normally, in the old days, there were 6 to 7 days that was being used for CIAA, and then 4 or 5 graduations. And in recent years, we've used it for less days for the CIAA, 3 days for the CIAA, and slightly less graduations. So
I'd love to have an accounting of that in detail. We don't have to do it right now, but I think that would be useful. Has a lot of questions that council has been related to that. Following up on that, are we saying special events, like all concerts are considered special events?
No, concerts are traditionally are for-profit businesses.
Yeah.
And so those are defined separately, and those are the purview of the Hornets organization, who has the rights to book the facility.
Oh, okay. So the higher profile is like the All-Star game and.
The bigger events that we want to go after, we jointly want to go after, they agree to cooperate with us to do things like the CIAA, the NBA All-Star Game, NCAA regionals, ACC championships, those types of things.
I guess the follow-up question would be for Mr. Barrett. And this follows up from a question that Mayor Pro Tem asked in last week's session. We've been promised or suggested that the improvements that we're discussing, the investment in this arena, will bring more events to the arena, and more use and therefore more revenue. But in the life of the arena, we no longer hold CIAA, we no longer hold WNBA games there, we no longer have hockey games there, we no longer have equestrian events there, we no longer have circus, but that's not necessarily because we can't book that anymore. Well, because you don't want to book that anymore. We don't have NASCAR All-Star events there anymore. So what is the plan, what is the menu of more events that we should expect to come in after these investments are potentially made?
So I think the answer is there are multiple levels of response to the comment. I think the first thing, the starting point is that your regional competitors are investing in their buildings. And in order to maintain the events that you have, you need to stay competitive. So Atlanta's put $200 million into their building. I'm sure you saw recently there was talk about Raleigh putting in excess of $200 million potentially into their building. We're actually working on that for the Centennial Authority on the public sector side of the deal there. And so you have a lot of competition in the marketplace. So one of the keys is you got to invest in your building to remain competitive. So a number of the investments that would be made into the building are intended to attract events. Keep the events you have and make yourself more competitive for those other events. Sound systems, star rooms for concerts that come through, making yourself more attractive for ACC and NCAA events. So a lot of the investment is going into the core of the facility and the infrastructure of the facility to keep those events and to also attract those special events that you're talking about, whether it's RNC or DNC or the ACC tournament. I know that the Hornets have been cooperative with the city in terms of attracting the ACC as a headquarters here. Having the headquarters here puts you in a really good position to get the ACC events going forward. So I think part of it is to remain competitive in terms of specific types of events. Hopefully the circus is coming back in a different form. That's what the industry is telling us. But keeping those family shows, keeping concerts continuing to come, making the building more attractive for those concerts and the performers as part of that investment. And then when you move the practice facility to the CTC, that potentially opens that space up for community-oriented types of events that the Hornets have been talking about would be a good use for that space that they intend to use that way as a potential as well.
Point of order. Point of order. It's 2 o'clock. Can we talk about what the plan is here, given this
I will
meeting
finish
is-
up my questions.
Right, but point of order, though, this meeting for the committee ends at 2. I just wanted to know, are we going to continue this discussion today, or are we going to come
No,
back
we're going to go through the agenda.
Okay. Are we going to take a vote today or no?
There's no vote.
So I hear that, but I would also suggest that growth is happening. For instance, Hamilton just finished a 3-week run here after doing a 3-week run in Greensboro, and now they're in Durham doing a 3-week run. So while we're in competition, there also is growth happening. So people are going to go to a concert that goes to Raleigh, that also goes to Greensboro, that also comes to Charlotte and Atlanta. But what I'm hearing is that these improvements we're not necessarily banking on a larger menu of shows coming to the arena, but you're suggesting that we need to do this in order to keep the existing level of entertainment coming through the arena.
I think it's both. I think it's both. I think the example you give is a really unique example in Hamilton. But I can tell you from the promoter interviews that we did during our market demand analysis, they're not playing all the venues that are in the region. When they tour and they go north to south or south to north, they're hitting a couple, whether they hit Atlanta and Charlotte and then go to DC, or they hit Atlanta and Raleigh and go to DC. They're not hitting all the venues in the marketplace. And so, concerts is a really high economic impact event. It's one that the community benefits from, and that all kinds of different parts of the community from a demographic standpoint benefit from. And if you don't invest in the building, you run the real risk that you would lose those types of events going forward.
I just want to add, because you talked about all the things we don't have. We had a near record year this year as well. So we have lots of events going on at the Spectrum Center, as you know. And there are other types of events that we can have different than the ones that you pointed out that we lost.
I would love to know, what that prospectus is before we make this decision.
I can give you a list of the events that we've hosted there, but family shows and concerts.
Okay. Councilmember Ashmere.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Murray, thank you so much for addressing the question I had raised about CIAA tournament. So I know you had mentioned that you will work in collaboration with the city to put a competitive bid. What would you do differently?
Well, I think we have bid on that business over the years, and we've won most times. This time we didn't win. And we would continue to make sure that we put our best foot forward. We'll be aggressive from a scholarship perspective, as we have been in the past. And actually, the first contract that I negotiated at the beginning of my career here at the city, we dramatically changed the way we did scholarships, and that now is more the expectation, and so we would continue to do that. We talked about controlling pricing. I'll just say that's a difficult thing to do because it's really illegal to price fix. And so you don't go around telling everybody what they can charge. But what we do is create blocks of hotel rooms that the conference negotiates with each individual. And I will say that the hotel community did a fabulous job of offering blocks at lower rates than they had, that we hear about in the marketplace. And so, in fact, for the last 6 years, our rates have remained flat or declining on an average for the CIAA tournament. So while the pricing is higher than it is in Baltimore, it isn't unusual for Charlotte. I also say that if you look at all the major events that we've done in recent years, the DNC, the NBA All-Star Game, those rates that we have for the CIAA tournament that create the same kind of impact on hotel inventory, those rates are all very consistent, and the CIAA rates are not the highest rates for big events that we have in the marketplace.
Thank you, Mr. Murray. So as much as we highlight the economic impact the CIAA brings, let's also recognize the rich culture that we must embrace. Thank you.
Okay, let's pivot to item number D, funding affordability.
So with that, I will ask Matt to come up. We have Teresa virtually while we're waiting on everybody. I do want to make one clarification of what Mr. Barrett said, because we have not won the ACC headquarters yet.
No, just to be clear, I said that they were cooperating in your efforts to attract the ACC tournament, or the ACC headquarters, so sorry if I misspoke.
All right, Teresa, do you want to start to walk us through the funding affordability? Everybody will know that these are the same slides that we saw the other night, but I did want to give Teresa the opportunity to do a deeper dive into this as it relates to the hospitality funds. Teresa, I'll turn it over.
Thank you, Tracy. Again, Teresa Smith, CFO, and in the room with you is Matt Hasted, our city treasurer. So just in case we had any technical difficulties, we would be covered with these slides. But what I wanted to talk about is specifically related to the $215 million around the arena. So this first slide is a reminder about where the funds come from. So hospitality revenues we talk about as a kind of a broad bucket, different types of revenues, but they really fit into 3 different categories. So at the top of the slide, you see Convention Center Fund. This is occupancy tax and prepared food and beverage tax. And this money, from a statutory perspective, has to be used on convention centers, stadiums that are greater than 60,000 seats, as well as amateur sports. So when we talk about things related to Carolina Panthers or Tepper Sports, the Convention Center Fund is where that conversation would happen. If we drop to the bottom of the slide, where we have the Hall of Fame Fund, this is funded by occupancy taxes, but those taxes are specific to the NASCAR Hall of Fame. So not what we would be talking about here. Highlighted in the middle of the slide is the Tourism Fund, and this is where we're looking at a portion of the occupancy tax as well as some of the vehicle rental taxes. And these are the taxes that fund coliseums, auditoriums, museums, arts and culture activities, and events and festivals. Next slide, please. So highlighting here the hospitality revenue capital investment policy that this council approved in February of 2021. Basically, there were guiding principles around the projects that you would evaluate, and then there were financial parameters that would be required to be met as we looked at each individual project. So on the left-hand side, you'll see things about a comprehensive hospitality investment portfolio. So this investment would definitely be part of that type of portfolio. We've talked about how it catalyzes the surrounding area and provides economic growth. I won't talk through each one of those. I'd rather focus a little more on the financial parameters, which are on the right-hand side. So what we look at is to make sure that we are maintaining 100% of next year's debt service when we look at this project. And this project does meet that financial parameter. The policy actually established a new reserve of fund balance called a recession mitigation reserve. And so what that does, it looks at how we have received hospitality revenues looking backwards, and then we reserve a portion of our fund balance to give us some of that economic stability going forward. And in just a second, I'll show you what that looks like from a visual perspective. We also look at making sure that we're amortizing our debt so that we're doing that. Really, in this case, we are aligning the debt with the estimated useful life of the building. So no longer than a 20-year term for this particular debt. And then the bottom item there is related to ongoing maintenance. And so something that this council has talked about is not just looking at what's the new thing or the shiny thing or the kind of the most in thing, but also thinking about how we're maintaining our existing facilities. And so we made sure from a modeling perspective that we did account for maintenance for this facility as well as our other facilities. So next slide. So this specifically is a slide around fund balance, and kind of working from the bottom to the top, you'll see sort of a blue color on the bottom of the slide. That is this new component that is the recession mitigation reserve. So this is a piece of the fund balance that we will hold out related to how we've collected these hospitality revenues in the past. The next little bar there, kind of not little bar, it's a larger part of the bar, but the darker green is related to the debt service. So you'll see this is where we're reserving 100% of the requirement for next year's debt service. And this goes throughout the life, although we're only looking through 2036 on this chart. And then the lighter green, which is on the top, this is the available fund balance. You'll see that we have more available fund balance in the early years, which is where we're using that for this project. Available fund balance gets a little smaller as we get into the 2030s and 31, but then the fund balance starts to build back up again. And so if we go to the next slide. Next slide, please. This slide is affordability. And so this is how you'll see how the fund balance plays into the affordability. So if we're looking at the first couple of years, the affordability for major projects, so those really big investments, is low because we're using our affordability on this project. But it doesn't mean that we don't have affordability forever. So as we start to get out into those later years, we start to see that the affordability ramps up again, and there is more affordability into the future. One of the things that I would point out here is that what we have modeled is an amount, not a large amount, not a huge amount, but we have modeled each year to be able to look at things like a Charlotte Shouts or the HBCU games that we just talked about, President's Cup, different things that we have talked about that we know are on the horizon. We have allowed for those things in the model as we go forward, and we'll evaluate those as those opportunities come up. So with that, I will pause here for any questions that you have.
Thank you very much, Ms. Smith. We've seen this information before, but just wanted to make sure everyone was comfortable with where we're headed to. I see Councilmember Ashmere.
Mr. Chairman, I'm good.
Okay. Let me go to, I don't see any other committee members. Let me go to Councilmember Winston.
I just want to reiterate the point I made earlier when we were talking about the naming of it. This is these three buckets of money, we have a lot that is dependent on us already to consider, and stuff coming up, whether it relates to Discovery Place, again, Entertainment District, Panthers, stuff at Eastland. Right now, this was one of the concerns we had with this kind of seemingly just to appear. It feels like sometimes we're in one of those carnival booths and air is throwing money around and we're just trying to figure out, what's the best way to deal with it at this moment in time. I'd like to have a much more, a less transactional approach to making these decisions, and a much more methodical approach as we consider everything that is in front of us and stuff that is on the horizon. I think it would benefit our partners and us and our community better. Again, I just, a bigger discussion, I think, not just specific to this deal.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had specifically asked about this affordability with regards to arts and culture. We're going through a massive upheaval of how we fund arts and culture in Charlotte, and we're spending a lot of money on a cultural vision plan for the future. The infusion fund runs out in 2 years. And so from this, it would look like we wouldn't have a source of funding for arts and culture. And that's going to be a big concern for me for this project, in addition to, as Mr. Winston said, other things as well. But, the goal we were trying to get to was a steady source of revenue to fund our arts and culture. And I still don't have an answer to the question of what does arts and culture bring into our community on a per capita basis versus professional sports. So I'll still be waiting for that information before I would be able to take a vote before I'd be able to vote affirmatively for this project. Thank you.
So, Councilmember Isel, we do have some data that we can supply related to kind of attendance numbers related to the various venues that we have across our city. We've tried to dig into that a little bit more in understanding, but we do have kind of attendance numbers for that might shed some light on what you're looking for. And then I don't have an answer for you on the arts and science funding. I will say that, we don't really have the carnival.
I just want to be really careful with our language. It's arts and culture funding.
Arts and culture funding. I don't know from the staff side that we've anticipated that was coming out of the tourism funding, and I don't know that that's yet determined. But I will say that as we look at these projects, we do take a methodical approach of kind of looking across the projects that we know are in front of us, and how can we maximize what we have in order to do the most that we can. So I just want to make sure that that's clear. We don't try to take it one project at a time, or we really do think about what's in front of us.
Okay. Councilmember Drakes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I have a concern that's similar to Mr. Winston's, but I'll try to make it sound different. What we're being told here is that our approach to funding projects is going to be responsible, that we're not going to get over our skis, that we have a clear understanding of what our capacity is, and that we won't get ahead of that. The thing that's hard to glean from this is what the implication is in terms of the timing of some major needs that we are aware of, and when we're going to be able to tackle them. And I know we've always avoided conversations about trying to itemize, what the demands might be on these various funds and when we expect to meet them. But in this context, it's just difficult because I appreciate Ms. Smith's description of how we will avoid overcommitting ourselves and how we will use our capacity responsibly, but I can't really interpret it in terms of when we're going to be able to do some of the things that we know we're going to want to do. And Discovery Place is a prime example. One of the funds actually expires. Which one is that?
Mr. Driggs, that's the prepared food and beverage, and so that's in the convention center fund, so it's in a separate fund.
So no portion of that affects the funds that we're relying on for this. Good. My other question relates to what I was saying before, and that is that we're talking about committing $60 million in our agreement with the team, relying on the sale of naming rights, without, however, having any contractual commitment as to the naming rights in hand. So if it came down to it, if we had to fund the $60 million from existing sources, how does that affect the picture? And does that simply mean that other things are going to get deferred even further? And I don't expect it will have to do that, but if we don't have locked in contracts for the $60 million, I think, and we're committed unconditionally to the terms of the deal with the team, then I think we need to think about what our capacity is on a contingent basis to absorb the 60 in our hospitality existing revenue streams. So, and the answer I'm sure will be sure we could do it, but then how much later does all this other stuff get done that we want to do? And I just wish there was some way we could have a clearer picture of what the big ticket items are that are looming and how they are being moved around as a result of these commitments that we're making. It's something I think we ought to be able to understand. Can we get any of that information?
So, Councilmember Driggs, I'm happy to talk you through that. I think let me hit on Discovery Place for a second, because we're in constant communication with the Discovery Place team, and I would not say that us doing this project pushes their project out further. They have a vision of what they want to do, but they also have another current project with Discovery Place Nature that's going on right now that they're fundraising for and things like that. But the other piece of that is with Discovery Place, you have a lot of other tools that we can use to see that project come to fruition. They own a second block. They own a majority of the first block on Tryon that the facility sits on now. So you can look at that back block as land sale. You can look at that back block as something that you could put development on, that you could do a tax increment grant on. So we have a lot of different levers other than just tourism to look at that project. Now, what I will say, and I've said it to Discovery Place, is, before COVID, I thought there was a big market for that back block. I think that is slowed a little bit, and I think the timing specific to that project is let the 7th and North Tryon project get started, let the library get started, let's start to look at some of these other tools and how we can use those and best utilize those tools to implement the vision that Discovery Place has put together. So I don't look at it as this project has moved the Discovery Place project. I look at it as this project, the timing of this project came before the Discovery Place project.
So I appreciate that, and I will talk to you offline. What concerns me is just the message seems to be that an obligation that I don't believe any of us on council were really aware of came to our attention relatively recently, in the last year or a few months or whatever, but we're being told, don't worry about it, it doesn't change anything. And I just don't know how you absorb $173 million and it doesn't have an effect on other things. So I just hope we can be a little more upfront about that and get a better feel for the choices that we're making when we make this commitment. And again, I'll talk to you again, Tracy, offline. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Driggs. Ms. Dodson, you want to?
Well, I know that we're about to lose Dan Barrett, and so I just wanted to take 1 second, Dan, if there's any last remarks that you kind of wanted to say, because I know you have to leave, and I appreciate you actually flying in for this today.
No, I apologize. I just have another commitment that I couldn't get out of. I've probably got another 5 minutes unless you can find me a room that I can sit in to take a conference call at 3. Yeah, okay, then I can. Okay, all right. Great, I'll stick around, thank you.
All right, so let's get to the MWBE portion, then I think we can excuse Mr. Barrett once we get through that.
Is there anything else on?
I think we're good there. Again, I think this is a really good discussion. It kind of lays everybody's perspective on the table, so you know where the council member sits on a wide variety of issues. And I think it's now time to pivot to the MWB discussion, and then we'll end the meeting with the community feedback.
Thank you. We did hear several questions on the MWSBE goals last week. If we can forward the slide, there we go. And I wanted to make sure that we gave both Phil Rieger and Steve Coker the opportunity to talk about the process, and Dan also from y'all's side and some of the work and dialogue that has gone on.
Thank you, Tracy, and thank you, Chairman, for letting us be here tonight or today. Steve and I are going to provide an explanation for how we develop the MWSBE goals. We hope that that explanation will answer a lot of your questions. First, let me start by thanking the Hornets. As we've engaged in conversations about the goals, it's very apparent that the Hornets are very supportive of the city's inclusion goals and utilization goals, and they've expressed a firm commitment to meet, if not exceed, the goals on this investment. And so we're really appreciative of that. Tracy shared last week in her presentation that we had tentatively set a goal for 16% MBE and 14% SBE goal. That's a global goal that would cover the proposed $215 million of spend. That's a big goal. The goals were set consistent with the provisions that are described in City Council's policy. And so Steve and his group used the policy to develop the goals, the global goal, and they'll use the policy to continue to develop the specific contract goals that will result as contracts move forward to execute the work. Finally, the CBI office, led by Steve, will be responsible for providing policy oversight for the project, just as he would for any other project that the city would do. So they'll be looking after the spend and ensuring that contractors are meeting those contract goals as those contracts are let and executed. So let me turn it over to Steve. He's going to go through more specifically how the goal was developed, and then we'll be glad to take any questions.
Thank you, Phil, and good afternoon, leadership. As Phil talked about, we set goals of 16% for minority business enterprises and 14% for small business enterprise, and this was done in tandem or in conjunction with the General Services Liaison. These goals are based on historical data from similar projects, as well as the MSBE firms that we have in our directory. Some of the historical projects that I'd like to cite to include Spectrum Center projects, Spectrum Center suites renovation, Spectrum Center's event level renovation, Spectrum Center roof and valve replacement, as well as projects at Bank of America Stadium and the Bojangles Coliseum. We also had a very successful convention center renovation, which was a very important project that we looked at. I want you all to note that these goals are not set in stone. In fact, we'll set them on a per scope basis. We actually won't know the specific goals until the scopes of work are identified when the contracts are issued. CBI will work close with the identified prime contractor, and in the future, it's the plan for CBI to host MSBE outreach events. And finally, we'll continue to monitor the contract's compliance over the course of the life of the project, and make any amendments as necessary. Again, thanks to the Hornets for the support and commitment to the business inclusion of this project. And that's all I have. Any questions?
Thank you very much for the presentation, and I'll open the floor up for questions from committee members.
Mr. Chair, it's Ed.
Ed.
Thank you. I just want to say briefly, these quotas are established in a legal framework as well as in a social framework. And we are able to establish these goals because of a disparity study that we conduct, which goes through a rigorous process of establishing whether minority businesses are represented in our contracts in proportion to their share of the market. So all I'm saying is we don't have the latitude arbitrarily to just try and negotiate a 30% limit or something because, and I don't know if there's a lawyer on the call, but we are doing this partly in the context of the legal environment in which we conduct our disparity study and continue to implement our CBI. It's just an observation. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Driggs. Any additional questions? And we'll, again, this was a question that was asked by Councilmember Johnson, so Ms. Dodson will make sure that we kind of make sure she understood what we talked about this afternoon, and so you might want to kind of put an asterisk by that question. Gotcha. All right, last item is community feedback, and Mr. Snyder is joining us. I want to thank everyone for their patience. Mr. Barrett, thank you very much for being here today. We really appreciate that.
So we felt like this particular piece was important because we launched a website last week. We have continued to try to push it out in as many directions as we can to get as much feedback. But we think also the benefit of this is being able to get the real-time feedback, hear the comments, and then be able to respond as things come up or as needed. So with that, I will turn it over to Jason.
All right, and I will try to keep this quick. So if we could jump ahead to the next slide. One more. All right. So as Tracy mentioned, site launched the day after the public presentation. Includes some high-level information, links to documents, and then we have a form that we're asking people to fill out with comments while they're trying to gather some basic demographic data. I think, as Tracy said, the benefits to this is the regular monitoring, the ability to add, update the site, and provide answers to some of the questions. We went through this this morning, identified some things that we need to clarify and respond to, so we're able to do that quickly. And we kind of think about this as almost a digital public hearing, where we're then using social media to support the marketing, for lack of a better term, of the site. We're on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Reddit, Nextdoor, all the popular sites. And what we're also been doing is monitoring the performance of the site and our social media. We're going to be putting a little bit of money behind this to really try to make sure we're really getting this out there. We're pushing it to the top of Google, trying to push it to the top of Google search, but we're also really trying to make sure it's in front of people within the market, some of the geofencing and some of the other stuff that we're doing. So we're really doing a lot of work to get the word out there and make sure that people can come in and leave comments. Next slide. And so what we've seen, so remember this launched late morning, early afternoon on Wednesday, so we're really looking at less than about 4 days, less than 5 days, and really pleased with what we've seen in the first couple of days. So on the site, we've already had more than 1,000 site views, over 27,000 social media impressions, and certainly the coverage was reported by all the major media outlets and is continuing to do so. In terms of the interactions, so we've had 160 comments via our social channels. As of 10 o'clock this morning, we had 49 comments to the site. That's actually closer to 55 already by this afternoon, and have had 750 votes on our LinkedIn poll. And you can see in our very basic pie chart, we're able to just kind of quickly go through the comments and at least give an indication of, are they supportive, are they opposed, or are they neutral, non-specific, and at least tag it to get a sense, right? This is not scientific. It's not a double-blind, placebo-controlled study, but it is helpful to look at, are people supportive of it? If they are, what are they saying? A lot of the feedback has, especially the neutral, non-specific feedback, of specific things people would like to see happen in the arena, outside the arena. And so we're going to continue to monitor that. Obviously, it's been incredibly helpful. And then in terms of the kind of demographics, what's been helpful is we have a very We had a lot of demographics we wanted to ask for. There were some things that, from a best practice, we were worried that if we did ask for race, gender, and got into those details, people would be reluctant to share their comments with us. So we wanted to find the right balance of getting some meaningful demographics without providing barriers to people to provide comments. So what we've gotten so far from the 49, 96% live in the city, 43% work in Uptown, and 76% visit Uptown often for entertainment. So when I see that demographic, what it tells me is they're engaged people, right? This is people where this work is going to impact or affect them. And some of the takeaways, we're going to continue to update the site. So people want more information on the impact and plans for the CTC. So a lot of it was discussed today. We've gotten some questions about consequences of only performing obligated upgrades, role of public transit, outdoor activation. So as more information becomes available, we're able to update the site. We are capturing email addresses, so we'll be able to follow up with people and provide answers to them. And then for council, we are going to package this up and provide this to council at the end of the week.
Thank you. Ms. Dodson?
That was it. I think one thing, just as follow-up, questions that we heard today, as well as the public comment, we will quickly turn around and get back out to council.
I appreciate that. And obviously, the night of the vote, the public will get an opportunity to voice their concerns at the council meeting. And as we close out the meeting, I would be remiss if I don't turn it over to the mayor and see if she has any parting comments to make.
I do not have any parting comments specific to a number of the topics that the council members raised today. I think all of these are really good concerns. I often think about the idea of how do we address those major kinds of issues. And I see, or what I have a sense of, is that while we have some obligations that we may have to make, that we also have an obligation to begin a plan. And I would hope that the committee chair works with the staff to establish what we have to do because we're obligated and contractually, or what we think will be the short term, to allow us to have a deeper relationship and understanding of what we're going to do long term. So I really appreciate the ideas and thoughts. Learned a lot of things new today from our consultants. You guys have been a great team and really appreciate you. I was just in a meeting with people about arenas mayors across the country, and they talked about David Abrams as being one of the top people in the country that talks about this, but I think we've got the A-team all the way across the footprint here. But what I learned from all of those mayors is that most of the cities are trying to reckon the same way that we are. But we also have to think about the investments that we have made in this community around the sports opportunities and events are very important to what our city is today. So if you go to anything at the stadium and go across to the French Quarter, it's packed. And those are the people that we talk about when we say, how do we create equity and how do we create opportunity? It's not, as much as I would love to be a basketball star and make a lot of money, at the end of the day, it's the money that is going to be made in our hospitality industry that is going to fuel the decisions that we have to make to move forward as a sports town. And I believe that applies to our equity policy. Think about your Uber driver, your Lyft driver. Think about the persons that come in from Rock Hill, surrounding counties for our events. And even just look at our sales tax ratio of where is the sales tax coming in to support these kinds of venues. So I would hope that we take a real serious look at what I believe is one of the best economic drivers now, but how will it be continued as an economic driver in the future as we begin to compete and see how the world is changing. And it is changing. I think the model that was presented today was really important as we talk about naming rights in districts, because if we go about it in the conventional way, it is going to be something that is going to be put on a shelf and not happen. We've got to keep up and keep moving forward. So thank you for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And Councilmember
I
West.
just had a question for Mr. Schneider. How long is that website comment period open until?
The plan is to leave it open until the vote on the 13th, and that gets extended, we can leave it open.
Thank you.
Okay. Any parting comments, David, Dan, or Steve, as we close out?
Anything?
I'll just say thank you for the opportunity on behalf of the Hornets to be here. And I'm sure as you guys continue to deliberate, we'll be available for questions and answers.
I would say the same. I mean, we spent a number of months really working a lot of issues to ground. You've all brought up a lot of really very good issues, many of which we've incorporated into our strategy. But I think, you know, in a true public-private partnership where there's this private entity and the city of Charlotte working very, very diligently to make something that's going to be spectacular for the city. So I think, Mayor, I appreciate your comments about me personally, but I appreciate your support of this kind of a process, and the process has been a really good process. And I appreciate, you know, the Hornets and Steve have been really great to work with in this, as well as Tracy. I mean, she's moved on.
I was going to leave that towards the end. I want to thank Tracy and her staff for getting us to this point, and also want to thank the committee members for their patience. I know this is unusually long meeting for us, but we have a short time frame to make a decision. So I want to thank the committee members and also the council members who visited with us today to provide their input. This meeting is officially adjourned.